Alive as a House Fire was a song that came about largely due to the social influence of the time that it was written in, which was early June of 2020. And around that time, as many people can remember, we were seeing nationwide protests sparked by a lot of unjust killings, disproportionately of Black people. In 2016, we did write a song that was about this topic roughly. It was called No Place to Breathe. And this song, Alive as a House Fire, kind of feels like a sister song, or kind of like a response, or sort of continuing the conversation. Because I think it is an important conversation to have. I think it's very well represented in some genres, and I think maybe slightly less discussed in other genres like metal or metalcore. I think a lot of bands try to have a very apolitical stance where they don't want to offend a possible listener base with like their political beliefs. The classic people are like, the shut up and dribble, or the just play the song, don't talk about the thing. And I'm not really here to pass judgment on bands that are largely apolitical, but that kind of is contrary to my beliefs and my convictions that music needs to be in a dialogue. I think all art should be in a dialogue with what's happening in our culture. And even if you don't have a particular life experience, I think it's important to develop the empathy to try to really understand, like, well, what would it be like maybe if I wasn't born this way, or if I didn't look this way, or if I wasn't from this culture. And so Alive as a House Fire was sparked by me going to a protest in LA and hearing and seeing so much that I think I've largely have been privileged enough to be kind of sheltered away from, or it hasn't been my life experience. Like hearing very genuine people tell stories of their experiences of feeling like they're treated like second-class citizens. And this constant reminder that racism is alive in our society, and it's not even just on individual levels, but there are, I believe, systemic issues. And that's a very complex conversation that really I'm not going to dive in too much further here, because I think folks can find much better resources than me to do so. But I do think it's something that I wanted to discuss in this album, because it was happening all around us while we were recording. In fact, the city of LA had imposed a curfew on the citizens that they couldn't be out past a certain hour. So we even, like, the first week of recording in the studio, we were like cutting our time short because we had to like leave the studio and go home. So to say that these protests were not only part of the cultural discussion at the time, but they were also like having a real, even just like a byproduct effect on how this album was being recorded. And if anyone wants further resources on this, by the way, I guess I should mention, I think Dr. Cornel West has a lot of really good writings and things to say on it. So maybe just one name I would put out there to read up on that, or maybe the poet Bell Hooks, who actually passed away pretty recently, has some cool things to say. Also quite controversial, but like with anything in the socio-political sphere, I think it's important to hear from a variety of diverse voices before, I guess, coming to your own conclusions. And even when we do come to our own conclusions, I think we do well to remember that we don't oftentimes have the answers. But to dive, I guess, more deeply into the song specifically, I start out saying, America, the beautiful land of control, which is, of course, like a twist on the whole America the Beautiful song. Because I guess that's how I feel about this country. I guess I differ from so many people I see on social media who will be like, I hate this country, F this, everything about this country, because I've seen so much of it, and I've seen so many beautiful people in this country that, sure, the system's very broken, and I understand how, so many have rage to want to tear the whole thing down. But I also love so much of the land and the people and the animals that make up this hodgepodge, massive country of more than 300 million people. I was reminded, like when I went to Texas on a recent tour, I was saying how much I love Texas, and people were like, well, they passed this legislation that I disagree with. How can you love Texas? And it's like, well, because Texas to me is like the names and the faces of the people at the venues that take their time to like be with us. And so you just learn to like kind of live in that gray where you love people in a broken system. And just because one state in the electoral college goes one way, you shouldn't maybe say all people are a blank. Like we're encouraged by the internet to like make these massive sweeping generalizations, but this song is in a lot of ways like, I do love so much of this country, and I do want to talk about these issues because I care about this. And I also think that a lot of times the people who are having arguments are not so different than they think. They have different vocabularies. And a lot of times when we're arguing on the internet, we're not disagreeing on fundamental ideas. We're just basically saying, these are the words I use and those are the words you use, and we can't agree to find a shared language. And so it's just, we constantly miss each other and make straw men out of each other. And I'll be damned if that's not half of all of Twitter, just straw man fallacies. I think that's pretty much what Twitter is in a nutshell, I realized. And political debates too, straw man fallacies. But so I wanted to get into that, and then also though being quite critical of this country, and I say, see the cages, hear the fascist, or ask yourself. Which was to say that like, you can look at the politician that's saying the fascist bullshit, or a lot of times you can look at yourself and see like, what's the totalitarian impulse in me? Because going back to what I was talking about in Panopticon, if you gave any person, even the sweetest, most humble person, if you give them absolute power, over time, they will be eroded. And so I think that we need to see these systemic issues where they take root in our heart spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and be able to see to what degree is this broken system a reflection of my broken nature. Because until you can address the enemy that's inside, you'll be missing the problem because you haven't found the problem inside of yourself. Another influence I'd like to mention is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. And it was actually the movie adaptation, which is a really strange form of animation. I highly recommend anyone who loves cinema to watch it. But it explores kind of a panopticon state that has this dystopian approach to controlling people. There's like 3 layers of vocals at one part of the song, and there's like, I'm singing, and then I'm like speaking, and then there's like whispers. And what I'm saying in the speaking part, which I don't believe is written down in the lyrics, and it's a quote from Philip K. Dick. Keanu Reeves is the actor that says it in the movie. He says, "What does a scanner see? Into the head or into the heart? Does it see into me, clearly or darkly?" At least what I interpreted from this is, to what degree do these systemic powers that control us, do they see into us? To what degree are they a reflection of me? To what degree does the nation state that controls my body, that tells me if you don't pay your taxes or if you don't do these things, that this society that you never elected to really be into, we just sort of live in it. And they have the rights to our bodies, that if we do the things that are counter to the laws, that they have the right to take our bodies. They have the right to make us disappear from society. And to ask ourselves, to what degree does that system get us? To what degree are we seen or heard by that system? And I think a growing amount of people have a lot of doubt about the fact that they're being equally represented. And so much of the Black community in the Black Lives Matter protests that were obviously, I think, maybe the hallmark of American culture in the summer of 2020. So much of what was happening is people were trying to speak from their experiences, and other people who hadn't had those experiences thought, surely this can't be the case because I haven't seen that. And I wanted this song to be a challenge to myself to hear people's voices, and a challenge to other people that maybe were not expecting to hear something about society in this album to be challenged, because the link that I make between this topic of social injustice and mental health is that when I was being apprehended by the police in Belgium after being suicidal and my friends calling the authorities because they were worried about me and they didn't know where I was. I was approached by a cop, and I remember having a fight or flight moment where I was like sizing this cop up, like I think I can outrun them, or I can like kind of push them down or something. And I was in a bad state, and this isn't an endorsement of how to, don't, like, please stay alive if you're interacting with law enforcement. But what was interesting is the cop said in really perfect English, this Dutch cop, he was like, you don't have to worry. We're not like your police in America. We're not gonna hurt you. And I thought it was so interesting that police officer, and this is before the 2020 discussion, even this is in 2019, was so aware of the broken system in America that he was using his, like, it was that he was able to just recall that in a moment's notice, in a crisis moment, and say that to an American, which I'm sure I'm probably not the only American he'll ever say that to. That he, like, I'm not here to hurt you. Because even this police officer in his country had this awareness that the system there and the interaction between the people and the police that are supposed to protect them is so fundamentally different than the one we had in American society, that, wow, there must be something broken for this guy who knows if he's ever even been to America, but he can just say that on a drop of a dime, and say that to a white guy from America, let alone, we know that there's disproportionate sentencing. There's a disproportionate amount of non-white people that are in prisons in this country, and what people might disagree on the prescriptions and what we should do to change that, but you can just look at statistics and see that, like, we have an issue. We have a massive inequality, and for this cop to be like trying to apprehend me and using that knowledge really, to me, spoke to, like, in a weird way, what I'd gone through and in the, like, privileged, safe dynamic that I had with cops versus having had my own moments with police officers that were less than safe. One time I rolled out of the van, I'd been asleep and I didn't know that we were pulled over, and a cop, like, reached for his gun because I just rolled out of the van, out of the back door, in a bunk that he didn't know existed, and he was like, immediately thought that there was a dangerous moment. Or a time that we were at the studio and someone gave a call and a cop hopped out of the car and just pumped his shotgun and walked up to me, and you realize that there are I've even seen my own small moments of, like, we have policing issues, and I don't even experience that, you know, as someone who's black. So that's a lot of why we wrote that song. So much of Alive Like a House Fire was lyrically and especially vocally inspired by the band System of a Down. That a lot of the cadence and the vocal delivery for me was inspired by Serge and Darren, the two primary vocalists in System of a Down, and how there's kind of this really kind of frenetic, quick, almost like slapstick delivery where they're just like spitting out the words like so in a rush almost to say these things, that it's like one way of, I think, portraying anger that they do so well, and they were a huge influence on me. And we were actually recording this in North Hollywood, which is where System of a Down's like from, and we would drive through different areas where, like, we had, like, rehearsed in the past and seen pictures of them in the wall. And they're a very large part of the Armenian community for a lot of, like, rock metal people, especially in Los Angeles. And so we were listening to so much System of a Down, and they have a song where they say, war, fuck the system, fuck the system. And that last part is in a lot of ways just kind of a homage to System of a Down, which is really, really rare. If maybe it's not, I don't know if it's anything we've ever done before. It's way more common, I find, in like hip hop, where people will kind of like use a repetition quote of someone who inspired them on a song. You don't see it a lot in our genre, but I think I know that when I was growing up, I loved to see other people's influences, and that's kind of part of why I started sourcing. And this song, I kind of took it to the next level, and I just spoke System of a Down like into it, I guess. And but what fuck the system means is that I've just kind of realized from talking to people from a lot of areas of the political spectrum that they all kind of feel that way. And it's a shame that over half of the population knows that the system is broken. Some maybe would say irreparably, some would say that it's just extremely damaged and needs to be fixed. And it's a shame that because people are divided over wedge issues, there are common sense issues or common sense solutions that most people agree on, and it's even hard to get those done. One of which is like body cams for all police, that like if someone's going to be a public servant, they should be fully accountable to the public. And we know that that's probably something that we should be doing, but it can be hard to pass that legislation on like local levels especially. And just wanting to like be able to make a change so that people like Freddie Gray, who I make a reference in the song when I say swerving left and stealing rights, they've only come to take your life. Freddie Gray, who was executed by the police in Baltimore because they threw him in the back of a van and they had him tied up, and then they drove taking violent turns, and they broke his neck, I believe, or severed his spine and killed him by basically torturing him in the back of a police van. And the song makes references to real lived experiences, or children in cages being one of them. Like, I remember when there were reports of children in cages during the Trump administration, it so quickly went from like, well, Trump didn't do this, Obama did this. And like people just shifting the blame instead of being like, children don't belong in fucking cages. And I can't tell you, like, I think at some point I said that on the internet, and someone's like, just immediately was like, well, this administration. It's like, I don't give a damn which administration. Because honestly, I don't know if either of those administration really cares about doing the right thing, unfortunately. And it's not to say that all politicians and administrations are the same, but it's really a shame that like we see so much political theater that we start to enact it in our own lives. And instead of it like fix the damn problem, it becomes like play the blame game, get the one up. Like, it was actually them, they did it. And it's like, if you have, I think, real compassion for a child in a cage, you don't really care about the blame game. You want to like immediately fix the problem. And it really, I think I was just really irked by how so much of the dialogue was just straw men and not actually people like empathizing with people struggling. So I think that's kind of the rage that drove me to want to just kind of use that System of Down-esque fuck the system. And when I say break the prism, that's a reference to our 2016 song No Place to Breathe, where I say this privilege is a prism, reflecting our indecision, and is about how like we see, I think we all see the world through different prisms. Like C.S. Lewis says, we see through a mirror darkly, through glass darkly. The idea that we all have lens distorted by our own experiences, and we do ourselves and our neighbors a real injustice when we can't see that we have a bias, because we all have a bias, and it's not bad to have a bias. A bias is the life experience that you speak from, and it's valid, but it should never invalidate someone else's experience and their bias. That is Alive as a House Fire.